Good morning, everyone. I'm Misha Lawson, Membership Services Coordinator for the Ohio Fire Chiefs Association. Thank you for joining us for this morning's Safe Station webinar presented by Assistant Chief Chris Menapace of the Whitehall Division of Fire. If you have any questions, you can either raise your hand or type questions into the question bar and we will get those answered for you. And now I will turn it over to Chief Menapace.
Thanks, Misha. Welcome, everybody. I encourage you guys to ask questions whenever. There will be a time at the end of the webinar that you can ask questions. But, if you have one during the middle of a slide, please ask it then, because likely somebody else online has the same question. So we'll get started. Make sure you have your volume, if you're dialed in with a phone, have it muted. There will be a couple different spots in the presentation where there will be music in the background, so that's done for effect. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. This is called the opioid epidemic and the Whitehall help for overdoses.
Talk with you again, because a vision softly creeping left its seat while I was sleeping, and the vision that was planted in my brain stayed in me. In restless dreams I walked alone, narrow streets of cobblestone, neath the halo of a streetlight, I turned my collar to the cold and dark. When my eyes were stabbed by the flash of a neon light that split the night and touched the sound of silence. And in the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never share, and no one dared disturb the sound from silence. Fool said you do not know. Silence like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my arms that I might reach you. But my words, like silent raindrops, fell and echoed in the wells of silence. And the people bowed and prayed to the neon god they made. And the sign flashed out its warning, and the words that it was forming. And the sign said the words of the prophets are written on the subway walls and tenement halls, and whispered in the sound of silence.
So some of those statistics, some of you guys have seen, maybe not, but obviously it's widespread. This particular epidemic has zero care of the demographic of the population it strikes. It climbs through the affluent communities just as it does in rural America and in urban cities like Whitehall. So, but the good news is we are trying to do something about it, and hopefully from today's webinar you'll get some ideas of what your departments or what your organizations can do to kind of help. So when you look at Franklin County as a whole, here are some additional statistics here locally. 343% in the increase of dying. Now that's just not the overdose rate. Those are actual deaths, according to the Franklin County Coroner's Office. In 2017, you can see where the overdose deaths increased by 47.3% from 2016, and that is a tremendous spike. The year before, it was only a 28% increase, and it's all because of fentanyl. So if your particular community is not seeing the fentanyl-laced heroin or the straight fentanyl, it's coming. So hopefully you can get prepared for that. And then the other thing that's important to understand, there we are already for 2018. So that's just the first quarter. So you can see we're going to be well on our way to having an increase if we stay on track for 2018. I think it's a pretty important statistic to talk about the 12.3 suspected overdoses that visiting the ERs per day, especially here in Franklin County. Mount Carmel East goes on diversion. OSU East goes on diversion. Many of you in the rural areas maybe only have one destination. And so whatever your county or whatever your municipality or township is experiencing, when we take these people to the hospital, they're taking up beds that we can't get our difficulty breathings and our slip, trips, and falls and our other patients in. So that, again, you can see the impact that this is having on the pre-hospital care system as a whole. And then I wanted to make sure that we understood that HIV is up over 200%, but there's actually 179 new cases of Hep C every month. I just got a text message from another follower that they're only hearing music. They're not seeing the presentation. So I'm not sure if it's just a something with that one person, but if that's widespread, raise your hand and we can make sure that we don't have a technical difficulty. So when you look at Whitehall to set things up for us for why we're doing what we're doing, so this is where we were for the last 3 previous years, and you're thinking, well, that doesn't look like much for a city the size of Whitehall. 2017, 110 overdoses. We didn't count in that the 21 overdoses that the police took care of because there was an error in the way that we fielded our statistics. So that 21 is actually on top of the 110. But you notice our PD, 2 years ago, our EMS coordinator went over and showed the PD on how to utilize Narcan, and they were able to wake up 30 people before we got there. But the bottom line, we're increasing over 25% in the last 3 years. But when you make it relative to the rest of the county, Whitehall isn't as big as people think we are. Next slide, I'll give you the demographics of the community. But Franklin County has about 30 per 100,000. And when you look at our overdose rate over the last 3 years, make it relative to that $100,000 people, all of a sudden we're 5 times higher than the Franklin County average. So what that says is even though we're a tiny city, we have big city problems, and we are getting a disproportionate number of overdoses in our community. So, here is our community. The percentages on the left are the city of Whitehall, and the percentages on the right are the state of Ohio percentages. So you can see we're just over 18,000 people. We fall well below the all-white house. We basically almost triple the minority houses, and we have a strong Hispanic and Latino population. The other real big takeaway for our community is when you look at the amount of people per square mile. In the state of Ohio, we average about 280, a little bit over 280 people per square mile, but look where we're at Whitehall. So what this tells you is we got a bunch of people packed up on top of each other. We are very diverse. There's 9 different languages spoken at our high school. And then you can see where the average income falls, as well as the average home value. Now, again, the heroin epidemic strikes all demographics and all wage brackets, but we all know that it's also flourishing in maybe some of the poorer neighborhoods and some of the demographics that would support that. So here on this slide is we're going to start getting into what we're doing about it. The WHO program. And the WHO program, Whitehall's Help for Overdoses, was born out of a grant. And we were the sub-awardee from the Franklin County of Justice Policy and Programs. And we started working on it well over 2 years ago. And we gave enough of the information on our demographics in our statistics, and we helped the grant writer with our narratives, and we received the Franklin County received $400,000 grant. It had to be under, so we asked for $399,999.55. So those of you that know me know that I wouldn't want to take any more federal money than I needed, so I gave them 45 cents back. But the bottom line is we did receive the award, and then we were sub-awarded it from the county. The county saw that we had the energy to do something about the program. They saw that we had a disproportionate number of overdoses and overdose deaths here in our county, in our community, and they thought this would be a good place to start. So really there's 4 components we're going to talk about today. Safe Stations is the marquee program, and we'll talk about that on the next slide, but it ties in well with the overall project. So when you look at the overall WHO project, it's made up of a bunch of different partners. We have the Franklin County Department of Justice, we have the Whitehall Police, we have the Whitehall Fire Department, we have the Whitehall Mayor's Court, we have Maryhaven, specifically MASC, the Maryhaven Addiction Stabilization Center. We have the Heart of Ohio Clinic, that is a federally qualified health center here within the community that helps us out with some of our patients. But at the fire department, we really concentrate on the harm reduction and prevention aspect. That's what we're good at. And some of the easy things that we've been able to do in our community that we've seen instantaneous return on are the town hall meetings and offering prevention and education. We pass out our pamphlets. We pass out our safe station information. Our partners from Franklin County Public Health come in. They help us with the programs. We talk about what an overdose looks like. We talk about the dangers of heroin and fentanyl and how it can be laced and how much is deadly. And we, at the end of those town hall meetings, we pass out Narcan to each member that attends. And we also, what makes us unique, there's a lot of communities doing that, but what makes us unique is we pass out fentanyl test strips. And there was a big segment on NBC Nightly News. We were very fortunate to have the national news out, and we were on NBC Nightly this past weekend talking about the fentanyl test strips, and they are very controversial if you've heard about them. And basically the theory behind a test strip is it's just like a piece of litmus that you would use to test a hot tub or a swimming pool. And if it's a certain color, you drop in chlorine tablets or bromide or what have you. what the fentanyl test strips do is they test the dope after it's cooked. We ask the addict to just dip it in the dope and let it sit there. You have to dip it for 3 seconds. It sucks it up much like a glucose strip does on a glucometer. And within 10 seconds, there's either one red line or 2 red lines appear on the strip itself. If there are 2 red lines, then that's good to go. There's no fentanyl. And if there's only a single red line, that means that there has been fentanyl detected in that particular dose of heroin. So that's where it's controversial, because we take a realistic approach here in Whitehall. We know darn well that if a user has it drawn up and it's already in the syringe and they are sick, they are going to take it. So we don't tell them to discard the heroin that who knows what they had to do to get. We tell them to microdose, and that's very controversial. But at the end of the day, we don't feel like we're empowering. Remember, people that are in addiction and people that are suffering from long-term addiction do not utilize to get high and to feel that euphoria. When you understand addiction, you understand that they utilize to not be sick, and they don't want to die. So we are simply, we feel we're giving them a tool so they don't kill themselves. My community paramedic has a huge role in this. He obviously does a lot of the teaching. He does a lot of the community outreach. I'm most proud of him for his efforts with our school system. Between last year and this year, he got them all done last year. He took Project Dawn kits. We made them up and took them to each building, and he was able to train staff members in each building on how to use Narcan, how to recognize an overdose. And believe it or not, we had an overdose in an elementary school parking lot in the morning. Mommy dropped her kids off at school, and before she left the parking lot, she overdosed. And as the medic was pulling onto the parking lot, the staff member was there with the Narcan, preparing to give it. So we've already seen success in that program. Remember, when you do little outreach things like that, if it's utilized one time, it makes a huge difference. And then finally, we take advantage of OD MAP. And if you haven't heard of this, this could be its own webinar. Reach out to me. I can get you in contact with Frank Burhax, who is the coordinator here in Ohio. But OD MAP is typically managed by police departments or coroners, and they're encouraging fire departments. And to the best of our knowledge, we're the only fire department that uses it on a regular basis. And it is so simple. You load it on your MDTs, and when you're on the scene of an overdose, or even when you get back, you just touch the screen. And was it fatal? Was it non-fatal? And if it was, and then how much Narcan did you use? And if you do it when you're on the scene, you can actually geo-validate those coordinates, and it instantaneously in real time plots that overdose information on the map. Why is that important? Well, when you look at it from 20,000 feet, the people that are looking out for these surges that occur in the communities, they can start to see, if everybody would use this, they can start to see the pathways of travel of the impacted heroin or strict fentanyl in the different communities. And then before long, they can develop prediction analytics, and that we can get strike teams out ahead of it and help save lives. The second arm of our help for overdoses is law enforcement. I won't spend a lot of time on that since this is for the Ohio Fire Chiefs, but the bottom line is cops are good at the supply. That's what they do. They enforce laws, and they go put bad guys in jail. And our cops are very aggressive. In the last 2 months, they've taken over $1 million of dope off the streets, as well as seized over $1 million in cash, numerous weapons, and numerous dealers off the streets. So, again, you can't just do harm reduction and prevention. You still got to go after the bad guys. And then I'll spend even less time on the drug court, because, again, that's its own seminar. But a lot of the monies from the federal grant went to drug court. And we actually started our own mayor's drug court. We have a magistrate. The community paramedic, believe it or not, is the probationary officer of the court. He's actually taking probationary classes. You don't have to carry a gun. You don't have to have your APATA to be an officer of the court. That's a misconception around the area. The magistrate feels safe, feels comfortable with him. We've hired a defense attorney, public defender, and we also have hired a social worker. And she actually has her office in the executive hallway. She's actually right beside of me. So we have a social worker on duty at the firehouse every day. Not only is she seeing our clients that come through drug court, but she's here. She helps take part in our Safe Stations program if we need her to, as well as if there's people on the roster that want to talk to a social worker, that's never a bad thing. Excuse me. All right, so Safe Stations. This is our marquee program. This is the one that's getting all the attention. Safe Station stands for Stop Addiction for Everyone. And again, this program was born from my trip to Washington, D.C. this past spring. Once we were awarded the federal monies, myself and my counterpart from the county, Caitlin Looney, she's a licensed social worker. She's also a reentry specialist for the Office of Justice Policy and Programs. And she works specifically with high-risk women that are discharged from jail. She has about 30 clients. Her caseload's about 30 at any one time. And she helps these ladies get back into society through various programs, but they're all at high risk to fall victim and back into relapse. So her and I go out to Washington, and we keep hearing these different communities across the country talk about Safe Station, Safe Haven, Safer, all these different play on the word safe. And we kept asking about them, and there was one common theme that everybody was giving us. And all of these safe stations, if you will, were located, all the models had them located in a police station. So hopefully you guys are chuckling right now because, who would have thought it would be a barrier for somebody that's addicted to heroin to walk into a police station and say, hey, I'm addicted to heroin. Can you guys please help me? It's not that the police officers don't want to. It's not that our brothers in blue are not empathetic or towards these people. That's not what they do, right? Because the first thing they do, they want to know who they're talking to. They're going to run a check on them. And a lot of them have warrants, and they're going to pick them up. So, there's a huge, huge barrier there. So we realized that, and we got to talking, and I said, you know what, when we get back in the town, I really want to look into this because I think we can do this at a firehouse. So when we got back to town, I started researching it, and I found one other fire station in the country, and it was up at Nassau, up on the East Coast, up there in Massachusetts. Sorry, that's a tough word for me to say, but so I called the chief, and he had one of his captains send me the literature on it, and it was okay, and he was doing a good job. They were doing the best they could do, and they were very, very proud of their program. They were able to help 2 different people in 2 years. And I'm going to show you our statistics here in the first 4 months. We've been operating for 4 months here, very briefly, but so they've helped 2 people in 2 years, but even they called the police. The first thing they did was call the police to come to the firehouse. Again, that's a barrier for people to come in. Once that word gets out in the street that 5-0's involved, they're just not going to like that. So if you're thinking about doing this, you need to really self-evaluate your department and identify the barriers that you're going to have to come in from within. You're going to have people within your system that are not going to be accepting of this program. You're going to have organizational culture issues. You're going to have seasoned, tenured guys that may or may not be suffering from burnout. They're going to be looking at you saying, are you kidding me, Chief? Really? This is what we got to do? I woke that woman up 3 times last shift, and now I got to help her again. And, you have to be ready and willing as the fire chief to look right back at that person when they say, how many times a day am I supposed to wake this person up? And I just looked right at a couple of them and said, I don't know. How many times would you want me to wake your daughter up? Now, they don't like that. They don't want to hear that. But at the end of the day, if your community is asking you to get involved and they need for you to fill a gap, like our community was, then that's what we do. 25, 30 years ago, EMS saved the fire department. I truly believe that wholeheartedly. And I think programs like this and the community paramedic program, I think that is our next round of continuing the development of today's fire service. But the bottom line is how you roll it out is the key. Ours was very methodical. We did all the work in the background before any of the guys found out about it, tightened up all their relationships. And I rolled it out June 11th, 12th, and 13th of this year. And when we rolled it out, 5th, 6th, and 7th is when we rolled it out. And then we went live the following Monday, which was the 11th. And I needed to give the guys a buffer zone to let it sink in and ask for questions. But when we rolled this out, it was a 2.5-hour training. And the first thing we did is we aired the movie Heroin E. So it's the word heroin with an E in parentheses at the end of it. It's on Netflix. If you haven't seen it, it's the best 45-minute show you'll watch. It's a must if you're thinking about doing something like this. And I suggest you show it to your department. So we aired that all 3 days in a row. Heroin E because, a female hero is called a heroine. So they put the E on the word heroine as a play on words because the star of the show is a female deputy chief. So we showed the movie, and then I had the addiction expert, my counterpart at the county, Caitlin. She got up and she spoke with my folks for about 10, 15 minutes on what addiction really is. And she got into some science of addiction. And I'm going to give you just a little snippet of some of the things we talked about here later on in the webinar. But it was very important for me to have that expert in the room, and it wasn't just another EMS instructor, or it wasn't the grumpy old assistant fire chief that was all of a sudden the expert on addiction. I covered the SOG with them. We developed a very methodical SOG, so we gotta make sure it's as easy as possible. Don't write your SOG for your A players. That's always when we write our SOGs. I always encourage you guys to understand and again, self-evaluate, make the tough decision. SOG should be written for your C players. Don't write them for your A players because your C players are going to struggle, and we all have D players. So we just have to be careful there. After that, I had our partners at the Maryhaven Addiction Stabilization Center. The actual manager of the site came all 3 days and talked about the Addiction Stabilization Center, what the detox program looked like, what the patients would go through, what we needed them to do prior to bringing them. And then I went over the screening. And again, the screening is pretty simple. You do a quick physical exam, complete with blood pressure and all the other vital signs. Find out what their drug of choice is and what their daily use is. And then you find out, the big thing for us is we have to, hopefully it's just opiates, but the big no-nos are if they have used some type of benzodiazepine, a Xanax, a Klonopin. If they use those on a regular basis, they won't be candidates for our program here at Maryhaven. Now we've developed in the last 4 months and have been able to help most of those people because we've networked and found other resources for them. But they can't detox them off of the heroin if they're also using a benzo because of the risk for seizure, as well as alcohol. You'll see a lot of your patients speedball. They'll call it speedball. The most common, and that's when you use an upper and a lower at the same time. 8 balls are the most popular, and that is a little bit of heroin and a little bit of cocaine. And they call that an 8 ball. So that's pretty much what you have to watch out for. We don't want any homicidal or suicidal thoughts. Any female, we would ask that we can prove viability of the fetus. And sometimes that means we take them to the hospital and then arrange for transport down to the stabilization center afterwards. We also wanted to make sure that our guys understood the barriers that our patient were going through. They have to understand that most of these people don't have insurance, and this is very rare. When they finally work up the courage for treatment, they don't have insurance, they get turned away, or they're told they're put on a 6 to 8 week wait list. Well, that doesn't work. So what we like about the Maryhaven program is they actually have a team of specialists down there that usually within 48 hours of being there, they have insurance. They get them on Medicaid, and that now they have insurance. Yes, that helps the facility to get reimbursed and get paid, but now it also helps the client, because for some of these people, it's the first time they've had insurance in a long time, or maybe even the first time ever. Probably the most important barrier is the immediate and timely access. Remember, when somebody knocks on your door and says, I want help now, now's the time you help them. You can't give them a card and tell them to come back tomorrow between 7 and 4, because they won't do it. You can't say, hey, we don't have any beds. You have to wait 3 weeks, because they could be dead in 3 weeks. So, if you're thinking about doing something like this, I would encourage you to really get inside the science of it. Talk to some type of social working component and really understand that if you offer this to your community, you're going to need to find a partner that's realistic for you to transport to, or to arrange transport to, that is very, very timely. The other thing that you have to be ready for is the compassion fatigue and secondary trauma of our workforce. So we know that, I read an article the other day, we know that for the first time ever in 2017 that more firefighters committed suicide than died on the fire scenes. We also know that in the same article that it's estimated that 85% of us suffer at some level of some type of mental disorder, whether it's PTSD, vicarious trauma, secondary trauma, whatever it might be. But you're going to see some compassion fatigue, because some of these stories that these people tell us as during our transports is absolutely gut-wrenching. And I think first responders do a pretty good job at blocking out the gory and the grotesque injuries and deaths that we see. Somebody eats a 12 gauge, that's usually an image you don't forget. But the bottom line is, oftentimes that doesn't impact us as much as the grief that we feel through family members, and the grief that we feel through our patients. And they will be exposed to plenty of that if you do a program like this. And then the last suggestion I would have, if you're interested in doing something like this, is make sure you tighten up the wraparound services for the family members of the addict. Because remember, when there's somebody in a family that's addicted, it's not just the patient that's impacted. TAP United, the Addicted Parents United, it's a wonderful organization, and they truly, truly take care of the parents of, the grandparents of. It would shock you guys the number of grandparents in Central Ohio that are raising their grandchildren because of the mother or the father has been lost to addiction or is incarcerated. I actually had a patient that I took care of last week, one of the transports, and she was 52. So listen carefully. She was 52, and her 71-year-old mother brought her in. And the 52-year-old female that was addicted to heroin had 2 children, son incarcerated, it's not going to get out for another 20 years, daughter has fled Ohio. She's not even really sure where she's at. There was 3 grandchildren between her 2 children. And grandma, the 52-year-old, I took her in for treatment. So great grandma, 71-year-old with big tears in her eyes, gave me a huge hug and a peck on the cheek. And she said, "Honey, you're an angel. I wish I could stay and talk to you, but I have to go pick up my kids from daycare." Great grandma is going to be raising 3 great grandchildren because mommy and daddy have both been lost to addiction, and grandma is lost to addiction. So again, make sure you have resources for these people. And then the Prevention Action Alliance does a lot of the same stuff. So here's our current numbers. We're pretty proud of a few columns here. First of all, we rolled it out live on June the 11th. We were very fortunate. The local news media did a wonderful job at covering it. I had a well-timed town hall meeting at which I invited Sam Canones, the author of the book Dreamland. He came. We had some pretty high-profile people from around the region. You know, State Fire Marshal was here. We had a couple congressmen here. We obviously had elected officials here locally. Had a county commissioner. So we had some, pretty high-profile people at the event. Sam talked. The WHO team talked. And then I had 14 agencies from around Franklin County, ranging from Franklin County Public Health to mental health services to detox places to recovery housing, just so that the attendees could have a well-rounded view from the national level from Sam, the local level from the WHO team, and then the countywide and regional resources in the back of the room. It was about a 2.5-hour evening. We did pass out some Narcan and fentanyl test strips at the end of it. But the local media obviously picked up on that. So they started advertising us the 11th, the 12th, and the 13th. And the 14th of June, we had our first customer. So our first client came in the door on June the 14th. And as of yesterday, we had 251. And this was yesterday morning. I took one down yesterday. My community paramedic took one down yesterday. And then he and I were going to take a second one, but the crew did. And I think we had one overnight. So that number is actually 253, I believe. And literally as we were talking, we had one walk in the front door this morning already. So as you can see, it's not going to slow down. We do follow quite close to the national average when you look at it. This is primarily a white demographic problem. Usually the black population concentrates more on cocaine. At least that's what we found. We have had one male Hispanic. I always joke to everybody and say, please call me when we have the female Hawaiian here in Whitehall. But that is a demographic that the feds wanted us to track. Left-hand column, you can see it's pretty well distributed. The 79 shift administration, that's me and the community paramedic. We have done those transports between us. If it's a male, we'll go by ourselves. Once in a while, we'll go together. But if there's a female, I don't allow my community paramedic or myself to transport a female by herself. So you can look at spread out across our shifts pretty evenly. 3 units got some work to do to catch up, but we'll get them there. There's our age range, so obviously that supports the statistic that you saw in the opening segment. The majority of these people are between the ages of 20 and 39. And you can see middle on the right-hand column, these aren't necessarily all Whitehall people. They're coming from all over the state. We've had Portsmouth, we've had Marietta, we've had Centerburg, we've had Marion. It's coming from everywhere, and obviously all over Franklin County. But the number on this spreadsheet that we're most impressed with and proud of is the 52.05%. and with what we've called positive status. And we've defined that as somebody that's made it through detox and has completed some type of residential stay. And that can go from the 3 to 7 days in detox to up to 28 days. And then they are linked to sober living, recovery housing, intensive outpatient. But once they complete all of those things, that is considered, or at least linked. We lose track of them after the link is done. There's just a lot of reporting laws and HIPAA stuff. We just can't keep track of them after they leave. But the bottom line is 52% of the people that walk in our door get through detox, they get the resources they need, and they are clean, most of them, for at least 2 weeks, a lot of them up to 28 days before they're just thrown out there. And they're linked to a good support structure. So those of you that understand the national average, around 11 to 12%. So our program seems to be working pretty well. So bear with me. We're going to do just a little bit of science, but I'm going to give you this ahead of time because I always find this kind of stuff interesting, and it'll help understand.
On June 18, 1971, a war was declared that impacted the entire world and shaped one of the United States' biggest mistakes. It caused turmoil, took many prisoners of war, ruined countless lives, cost the United States billions of dollars, and spread illegal trafficking like wildfire. The enemy that the declaration of war was against was deemed to be the absolute greatest threat to the public of the United States. This enemy was not hunger, poverty, crime, or weapons of mass destruction. It was drugs. When President Richard Nixon declared that drugs were America's public enemy #1, the proposed solution was to crack down on drug trafficking and use through military might. However, the proposed solution failed to get to the root of drug addiction or see things through the drug user's point of view. Contrary to popular belief, drug users often resort to taking drugs for relief from their problematic life. In the 1960s, deceptive experiments took place. In these experiments, rats were connected to a supply of highly addictive drugs, such as heroin, through a tube that allowed the drug to quickly enter the bloodstream. The rats were then given the choice to self-administer the drugs as often as they liked using a lever. Advocates for the war on drugs were thrilled when the results showed that these rats self-administered an enormous amount of drugs, even until death. They argued that the same happens in humans and the war on drugs is justified. However, the most important variable of the experiment was left out. Everyone omitted the fact that these rats were placed in solitary confinement in tiny cages with no contact with other rats and very little contact with humans. They were not allowed to exercise, be creative, reproduce, play with other rats, run around, or really have anything fulfilling besides administering the narcotic. So another scientist named Bruce Alexander and his team set out to break the status quo. They set up an experiment where rats were given a large space to run around in, with plenty of rat friends and members of the opposite sex. They also had many hiding places, toys, exercise wheels, and unlimited access to food. It was a type of rat paradise, and that coined the name Rat Park. Yet the most important thing that they were given access to was an unlimited supply of the highly addictive drug morphine, which they could self-administer through drinking a separate supply of water laced with it. Then the experimenters compared the drug intake of these rats to rats placed in cramped solitary confinement with the same choice of drinking the morphine-laced drinking water or pure water. The results sparked a revolution in how we look at drug addiction. They showed that the rats in Rat Park consumed far, far less than the rats placed in solitary confinement and never overdosed. So what do these findings mean? It goes back to the fact that individuals feeling fulfilled and enjoying their reality do not seek hardcore drugs to escape their reality. An example of this was when an enormous amount of Native Americans sought alcohol and became addicted after they were deemed uncivilized, fell victim to disease, had their children forcibly assimilated into the English culture, had their economies destroyed through being pushed out of their lands and put on ever-shrinking reserve by English settlers. An article by Salem Press Encyclopedia of Health states that some causes for addiction in humans are antisocial behavior, stress, anxiety, and depression. All of these were present in the rats placed in solitary confinement and the Native Americans pushed out of their lands. In contrast, out of the 20% of U.S. soldiers that were addicted to heroin while fighting in the terrible conditions of Vietnam, 95% of those addicted never took heroin again after being brought back to the much better conditions in America. However, Rats have also shown that highly addictive drugs, such as cocaine, make the brain's dopamine receptors more sensitive and create cravings for months after the drug is taken. Perhaps, as Dr. Adi Jaff points out in Addiction, Connection, and the Rat Park study, victims of drug abuse should not be shamed, broken down, or expelled. Rather, there should be prevention efforts to educate them and programs to offer them relief for their trauma. If drug abuse is caused by an individual having a problematic life, then having to constantly look over one's shoulder or receiving a criminal record that prevents one from obtaining a job is extraordinarily counterproductive. Moreover, when Portugal decriminalized drugs and treated its addicts rather than punishing them, drug use was reduced by half in a 10-year period. So instead of spending billions on the estimated 50% of the American prison population in prison for drug-related crimes and waging the war on drugs overseas, money could be spent turning these unfortunate users into productive individuals through lending them a helping hand.
So hopefully that gave you a little bit of insight into addiction and why this disease is so gripping. So this slide here will just make sure you understand it. We're going to talk about these three drugs here. Hopefully you can see my cursor moving. But when you look at the brain and it says the opioid receptor, I want you to kind of get that picture in your mind, because that's what those opioid receptors are in the different locations of your brain, and they're everywhere. And there's three basically, it's called MAT, or medicated assisted treatment. And again, why am I sharing all this with you? Well, if you're going to do something like this, you need to make sure that the members of the roster understand addiction, because again, the more you understand stuff, the better you will be at treating them. So there's three basic kinds of medicated assisted treatment. There's three levels. There's methadone, there's Suboxone, and then there's Vivitrol, which is on the far right. If you look at methadone, that's something that somebody would have to go back to the clinic every day, and it's basically man-made heroin. It is a full agonist. It generates the same effect as heroin. It is highly addictive. Okay, it's highly addictive, but that is one form of medicated assisted treatment, and then they do their best to try to wean them off of it. A very, very common one, and I would say most common, is, and that's what Maryhaven uses, is the buprenorphine, or a lot of people call it Suboxone. And it is a partial agonist. So what happens is, if you see the shape of those molecules, it doesn't fill the opioid receptor completely, which means the brain calls for more of the naturally generated dopamine to fill the void, to make it look like the methadone model. Why is that helpful? Well, the first dose they give them oftentimes looks as much like the methadone. And then over the course of 6 to 7 days, they give them smaller and smaller doses, and they wean them off of it. And what that does is with each day's dose decreasing, all this blank space in between those Suboxone molecules are filled with naturally produced dopamine. And then the gold standard over here, the naltrexone, which is Vivitrol, it's a true antagonist. It'd be great if everybody would get that. This is the one that costs $1,250 a shot. And it is, you have to clinically be off of heroin and Suboxone for 10 days before you're ready for it, because it blocks it. It assumes that your body will fill up the void with naturally produced dopamine. Even if you would inject heroin after you have that injection and it lasts for 30 days, the heroin will not be able to penetrate that barrier. It is 100% possible to overdose, because you're never gonna feel it, because it's an antagonist. So I think it's important for you to understand that. And then when you look at detoxes, when we wean them off of the addictive product that they're on. We have a residential stay, which is usually at a place that does the detox. Then they can go for an inpatient stay, which is kind of like to make it relative to what we already do. Inpatient partial hospitalization, is similar to nursing facilities, somebody recovering after a broken hip. They're watched, but they still have some independent movement. Then you have intensive outpatient and outpatient. So the two of the clients, actually we have one now, and eventually we're going to get a second one here in our drug court. They have been mandated to participate in intensive outpatient. And that is 3 days a week for 3 hours a session of counseling, followed up by one of these medicated assistant treatments that we talked about on the last slide, and I've shown you here on the bottom of this slide. And then outpatient is 2 days, 3 hour sessions, then down to 1, and then down to none, and then down to not even medicated assistant treatment. So we've already talked about those. And then, of course, you have your recovery meetings. Everybody's heard of AA. NA is Narcotics Anonymous. Cocaine Anonymous, a lot of people haven't heard of, and everybody's heard of Al-Anon. So what's really going on around the state, and specifically here in Central Ohio? We have the Franklin County City of Columbus Opiate Action Plan. It's about a 65, 70-page document. It's about 3 years old, or 2 years old now. I have been fortunate enough to be invited in on 2 different subcommittees associated with that team, and to hopefully impact some of the programs we're doing. But it's pretty thorough, and it's been the model that a lot of other cities have used to form their own. The HOPE Task Force is very popular here. It was started by the Franklin County Sheriff's Office. Some of the communities have taken, like we have our own HOPE Task Force here in Whitehall. We have 2 detectives dedicated to the HOPE Task Force. And basically the goal is within 72 hours of an overdose, the police detective, a social worker, and our community paramedic was going, but it turns out to be a lot of people. But we try to get back to the home and not only reach out and try to get them linked to recovery services, but the cops actually talk to them and see if they're willing to give up some information on their dealer. So that's how we tie everything together there. We have the REACT team, which is based out of Southeast. Then the Columbus Division of Fire has REACT 1. They're basically the same thing. I don't want to say the problem with, but the thing about the REACT teams that we have to be careful with is when somebody overdoses and they were literally dead, and you say, hey, do you want to go get help? They're going to say yes, because they were dead. And so when we take them from the scene of an overdose directly to a stabilization center, oftentimes it becomes overwhelming and they sign out AMA. So great program, but it does have a high unsuccessful rate. Of course, we've already talked about safe stations. Project Dawn, I've already talked to you about that. Safe Point Harm Reduction is Equitas. They're the only game in town. Clean Needle Exchange Program. If you don't know much about that, we're coming down towards the end. I'm not going to go too much into it, but it is a wonderful program. Again, highly controversial, but some of the stories you hear, what clean needles can be used for. One of them, real quickly, I took part in one of the assessments that I was down there the day that they were passing out the clean needles, and a woman used about a half a gram a day. So those of you that are, she said 20 to 40 points, which is about a half a gram. So she spaced that out to 2 to 3 injections a day. She comes every week. So she asked for 100 needles. And I just kind of looked at her and called her by name. I said, do you mind if I ask you why you took 100 when it seems like 25 would have been enough? And she didn't miss a beat, man. She looked right at me and said, well, Chief, if I give the guy that I'm staying with 5 clean needles a night, I don't have to give him something else. So this is a wonderful program, especially for women. People that do not think that this epidemic is tied to trafficking are simply kidding themselves. And then the OR system you've all heard about. You see the statistics there, and we're really trying to show you that from 2010 we're listening, and we have our finger on the pulse of the pill mills. And sure, we've done a great job. We've decreased the prescriptions filled by almost 600,000. But what you guys got to do is, when you look at that population, that is actually enough opioids for every person in the state of Ohio to have a 3-week supply. So yes, it's better, but we still got some work to do. And then finally, politics is pretty huge. When you do programs and when you get out in front of things, and when you start causing a stir in the recovery world, you get people coming to town, and we have been blessed with some pretty prominent figures. We're pretty proud of our program. We had the Surgeon General of the United States come. He spent 2.5 hours with us a couple months ago. I had a panel of 22 people. Again, these are big decision makers around Central Ohio. We had county level people. We had representatives. Again, the marshal's office. We had prominent members in the business community. We had 22 different stakeholders, and he talked with each one of them. He was here for about 2.5 hours. Senator Portman came. It's very important for everybody to understand that the grant that we received was a result of his CARA Act, and so he came to see, because we are one of the most, well, he told us we're the most successful program he's seen with the government funding also. And then we were invited down, had the opportunity to speak on behalf of a bill that Representative Brown, obviously it crosses party lines, and that's okay. I got the opportunity to speak there at the Capitol when he introduced his new bill that would create a cabinet-level drug czar position for the state of Ohio, cabinet-level position. So pretty cool. It's pretty important for you to understand what's on the dockets when you look at all these things. I'm not going to read them all to you, but any one of those things could help you in your community. The Medicare and Medicaid stuff will become pretty important, especially when you want to get reimbursed for some of these calls. The big one, the STOP Act. Remember, a lot of this fentanyl is coming in through the U.S. mail. So if you get the opportunity, when we go down for our winter symposium, these are things that you should be familiar with if you're really interested in cutting back on the problem with addiction. So bottom line, you got to do whatever it takes. And I'm going to play a little bit of music here as we end, and we'll have some questions at the end.
Falling too fast to prepare for this. Tripping in the world could be dangerous. Everybody circling this vulture race. Negative, negatives. Everybody waiting for the fall of man. Everybody praying for the end of times. Everybody hoping they could be the one. I was born to run. I was born for this. Whip, run me like a racehorse. Pull me like a ripcord. Break me down and build me up. I wanna be the slip. Word upon your lip. Rather let you rip. Break me down and build me up. Whatever it takes. Cause I love the adrenaline in my veins. I do whatever it takes. Cause I love how it feels when I break the chains. Whatever it takes. You can take me to the top. I'm ready for whatever wanted the visual. I wanna be invisible. Looking at my years like I'm out of dumb. Everybody needs to be a part of them. Never be enough on the prodigal son. I was born to run, I was born for this. Hold me like a racehorse, hold me like a ripcord. Break me down and build me up. I wanna be the slip, put on your lip, better make you rip. Break me down and build me up. Whatever it takes. 'Cause I love the adrenaline in my veins. I do whatever it takes. 'Cause I love how it feels and I pray to change. Whatever it takes. Yeah, take me to the top. I'm ready for whatever it takes. 'Cause I love the adrenaline in my veins. I'll do what it takes. Critical, egotistical. I wanna be the parenthetical, hypothetical. Working on something that I'm proud of. Out of the box, in the box to the world. And the vision we've lost. I'm in the past. I'm just a symbol to remind you that there's no more to see. I'm just a product of the system of catastrophe. And yet a masterpiece, and yet I'm half deceased. And when I am deceased, at least I go down to the grave and die happily. Leave the body of my soul to be a part of me. I'll do what it takes. Whatever it takes. 'Cause I love the adrenaline in my veins. I do whatever it takes. 'Cause I love how it feels and I pray to change. Whatever it takes. Yeah, take me to the top. I'm ready for whatever it takes. 'Cause I love the adrenaline in my veins. I'll do what it takes.
So I got one question that popped up. It was from Chief Kitchen. Chris, have your personnel really been supportive of this? Positive attitude about the extra work, extra time, etc. And I got to be honest with you, I have over 50% of the guys. I really do say that. Over 50% of the guys support this wholeheartedly. Another fraction of them could take or leave it, but they don't buck it. But yes, I do have some guys that are less than supportive, and they are suffering for some burnout. They do look at it as extra work. That's one reason I think it's so important to me and for my community paramedic to stay involved. Our goal is to always transport more than any one crew, and we always try to do that. So if I'm here during the day, and I can break away from what I'm doing, I take part in the transport to take it off the heat of the guys, and they seem to be accepting that. But I also have in my corner 3 men on my roster that have been significantly touched with addiction with their children. So I have that going for me, because it's one thing to run your chops upstairs at the kitchen table about some program that the old man dreamed up, but when there's one of your peers sitting across that son or daughter is in active addiction, it really takes the wind out of their sails. So I don't know if you want to view that as a positive or a negative. I will tell you that each of those men at different times over the last 4 months have walked in and just simply looked at me and said, "Thank you, Chief." And it was just a nice handshake and a nice moment spent with 3 men that are truly living hell with their children. So that's as honest as I can be with you on that one, Joe. Does anybody else have any questions? Misha, I don't know how that would work. Do they talk? Do they type? What do we do?
If they have a question, they can raise their hand and I can unmute them, or they can type in. But so far, I'm not seeing anything.
Okay.
Oh, nope. Nope, we're good.
Okay, so I'm in the book, as they say. You can get a hold of me. It's pretty easy to get a hold of me. Uh, I'm on the, let's see, I'm the chair of the magazine, the communication committee, excuse me, the publication committee. Sit on the foundation. I'm obviously a member. All my contact information is online there at the Ohio Fire Chief's website. You can reach out direct to me here at the Firehouse at 614-237-0831, or drop me an email. But it's been a pleasure to give this presentation, and I hope you guys got something out of it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will be posting this on our YouTube channel later, so if you guys need to rewatch it or send someone else to watch it, it'll be available. Thanks so much.